Hello guys, welcome back to another tutorial of complete.NET APIs. So in the last tutorials, we had covered versioning of APIs. One important piece I had missed in the last tutorial was in our demo Swagger, the employees controller documentation wasn't rendering, and the issue was that we had forgotten to just mention the API controller for API controller attribute for employee controllers. So after doing that, we've got it working here. So now today, what I'll be covering up is about API documentation. And with .NET 7 and higher versions, .NET 6 and higher versions, Swagger is by default integrated, so it's coming out of the box. But still, we can improve the documentation. So as of now, you can see the page is quite empty. And the important piece of documentation is that if you are developing an API and it will be consumed by a variety of developers, whether mobile developers or traditional desktop developers or web developers, or even if it is consumed by some third-party companies, if you have a rich set of documentation available, which is integrated with your API, then it would be quite promising because the developers will be easily able to consume your API. Okay. And said that, let's move on. So if you see currently the basic structure is provided by .NET to us, which is scaffolded by default. Only for versioning, we had to configure some stuff. But now let's dig a little bit deeper into it and get some descriptions and comments around so that we know what each endpoint stands for, etc. Okay, so to do that, first what we'll do is I will enable the XML documentation or XML comments. So for that, what you can do is you can either right click and go to properties of your API project. Then you can come to build output, and here you can just check into this generate a API documentation file. But instead of this, what I prefer is I just prefer right clicking this and editing the CSproj file and adding up another property group here, which I will just add in a bit. Let's add the property group. So it basically contains the flag generated documentation file true, or generate documentation file true, and no one. So what this does is if you have set the generate documentation file flag on, and if you don't have XML documentation or XML documents to any of the actions or controllers, it will throw warnings. So to suppress that warning, we just say this and just save this. So now what will actually happen is, let me just clean and build this application and show you what it is doing. So it will generate an XML file, which will have the name of the actual library of whatever your API project is called, and will have an extension of XML. So if I go to my .NET and just check for XML file, so here, see, so this will be where all your XML comments will be stored. And now what XML comments are and how to add it is as follows. So let's go to our company's controller, and we have, say, get company's controller. So what we can do is just above this, we can just type 3 forward slashes. Okay, 1, 2, 3, and it will by default give you some placeholder. So here you can type what it stands for. So I'll just say this endpoint gets the companies in the system. And parameter, so if you see, you can just mention the parameter. So parameter. So what I will say here is, so since this is a get method, I don't usually mention the parameter because Swagger will by default give it to me in the form of text boxes. Now returns will be mostly the return type, but in this case, instead of returns, there's also another one. I would prefer a response. So response with a code of, so response code. So what this will return is 200. So we are mentioning that the response code is 200, and this will be just the description of the response inside that. So I'll just say this returns paged list of all the companies, paged list of all the companies in the system. Okay, so now let me just run this and see what difference it makes. So now if you see the API documentation, so have we added it to version 1 or version 2? So we've added it here. So it's still not taken effect. Yes. So I know why it has not taken effect. So before that, what we need to do is we need to configure it in the dependency injection. So you go to configuration, go to dependency injection, and add Swagger gen. So we just need to specify the option for add Swagger gen, wherein we need to specify the path of the XML documentation file which we have enabled. Options, and we can just add this. So this is the option dot include XML comments, and it takes the path of the XML file. So using reflection and path dot combine, what it does is path dot combine app context dot base directory. So it will go to the execution directory of this application, and using assembly, so it will get the assembly name or get this name and .xml. So it will find that file. So this is all the configuration we need. Now let's start again. And this was our controller. Let's see what it displays now. Yeah, so you see, so we had added the description. So here's the description. So in this way, you can describe what each endpoint can do. So this endpoint gets all the companies in the system. Now, if you see, it shows me the response code as 200. Okay. Now, what else can we do? So we can also specify what response types we are returning. So let me show you that. So if I click on try get, now it is giving you the response here. So now what else we can do here is we can give exact example of the response types of what response type it returns. So in this case, this is returning a paged list of company response. So for that, to do that, what we can do is we'll first add a NuGet package called Swashbuckle ASP.NET Core filters. So we go to NuGet packages, Swashbuckle .ASP.NET Core net ASP.NET Core .filters. Yeah, this one, let's download the latest one. Yeah, so once that is installed, what we can do is I will create inside Swagger, I'll create another folder called examples. So in this, we can have the request and response examples, which can be displayed, which makes whoever is consuming the API it makes the life of that particular developer quite easy, because everything is given as an example, even the response and the request types. So let's create 2 new folders. So this will take all the requests and all the responses. Okay. So now under responses, what I'll do is I'll create a new class. So since this is returning a page list of company response, so I'll create a class called page response page company response example. So I'm prefixing this with example because it is not an actual model class, but it is an example which we need to display in Swagger. So I'll just mark it as field, and we just need to inherit from example provider, which belongs to the library which we have just downloaded. Example provider Swashbuckle filter. So ours will be page list of company response. So let's implement the interface. And so here what we'll do is we will first create a list of example list of companies, so company responses, just to show the responses. And then the way we create the page list is we just return an example of the page list, page list.create, and we pass in this so that it shows the example response. So now since we have created it for the company page list of company response, let's head back to the controller here. And here we can add an attribute called reduces response type, and the response type it produces is type of, so it will be type of page list, page list of company response. And the response code is 200. Okay, so now if we just run this and see the outcome, let's check what it shows. Okay, so if we just expand this, and you see now it shows you a full example of what will be the response. Okay, and it also shows the content types, the basic content types. But in our case, we are just returning application.json, so we can specify that as well. So to specify that, we can just mark the entire controller as produces and add the content type. So we are producing only application slash JSON. So we are just producing the responses of this type, that is application.json. So now if we see the documentation there, okay, so now if we see here, it's only application.json because we've limited what our controller responds to, that is using this produces attribute. Okay. So moving forward, let's do another documentation for post. So if you see the post company looks pretty empty here now, let's do one for post as well. So if I go to post, it basically creates a company. So let me just add the documentation for that. Just add it here. So this creates a company. So then the company request. And if you see this XML documentation which is there, it also takes in markup. So I've made this bold so you can make the parameter type. So since this is a post, I am specifying what parameter type it is, the class name, and I'm making it bold so that it can display it. And in the response, it again creates a company successfully. Okay, so now let's create uh, the example for this request so that even that is mentioned there. Okay, so we'll just create a class called company request example. So this shows you that you can create request example, you can create examples for both request as well as response objects and have a complete documentation for your API. What we'll do here is just give some examples. So this will be the company request, expecting a name of the company, address, and the country. And now in the controller, you don't need to do anything else because it's not a response, it's a request. Let me also add for get company by ID. Okay, and I'll show you that we can add multiple responses as well. So that, so if you see now, get company by ID returns a successful company, and if it cannot find it, it returns not found. So this response structure, so whatever or responses your endpoint is returning, all can be documented. So if you see this now, I've done this endpoint gets a particular company from the system based on the provided company ID, and parameter is ID. So we can just say that this is a string. We make it bold, and this is a string. Now gets a company successfully, and if it is 404 could not find the company, not found. Now if we run this and check the documentation, okay. So if you see here now, and if I say try out, it will give me the company request body, and it gives me this creates a company in the system. So whatever documentation which we had added, we can see that. And if you see for get company by ID, you see there are two responses which it expects. So whatever documentation you've given, it is showing us that as well. Okay. So one more thing which I need to show is there is some other configuration settings which we can do. Like for example, if we just go to dependency injections, program CS here, okay, we can add some configurations which can help us display the documentation a little bit better. So if we see here, so uh, I'll just add few of the configurations here and I'll explain it, what it is all about. Okay. Yeah, so firstly is route prefix. I usually prefer to have my Swagger documentation in a specific route. So instead of it just triggering by default on /Swagger, I prefer it to be on API/documentation. Then default model expand depth is 2. So this is basically when the Swagger document opens up. By default, I wanted to open 2 levels of the accordion, and then the doc expansion property also covers that. So if this enum, so if I specify none, it will close all the accordions. Then there are 2 more properties, values of this enum. One is full and one is list. So by default, it was list, where each controller property was open. So I can just display it to you now. And the last important one is displaying the request duration. So whatever time your request took to run, like how it is shown in Postman, so that we can see here. Let us run that now and I'll show to you. Yeah. So now if you see, I have specified the route prefix as API/documentation. So I'll get the Swagger documentation only if I specify API/documentation. Okay, so now we have it. And if you see now, since I have a specified doc expansion none, I see a clean documentation page where only the entities which I need or endpoints which I need, I can expand them and see. Same way it will be for the other version. Okay. And now it looks quite clean. And let us run this and see. I will show you the response duration. So if you see, there's a response duration field which is set here, which gives you how much time your response took. And this is your response. Let's run it again and see. Yeah. So this is how we can have a well-documented API. So this was all from this tutorial. So let's meet in the next one. Bye for now.